Here's an interesting question. Is Christianity and alcohol completely incompatible with one another? I think that's something we need to talk about. Recently, a friend of mine posted a question on Facebook asking, should pastors be drinking alcohol? To which I replied, first of all, that I don't think there should be any distinction between what the standard is for pastors and for other regular Christians. And then secondly, I responded and said, well, the Bible places no prohibition whatsoever on the drinking of alcohol by believers. But apparently, it's not that simple. One after the other, people started responding to her thread. Everyone from apostles to prophets to evangelists to you name it, these guys were on there coming after me saying it's absolutely ludicrous. Christians should never be drinking alcohol, and especially Christian leaders should never touch alcohol. So what is the right answer then? Now, unfortunately, I don't have access to the full thread of her Facebook post. I tried to find that again, but I couldn't. I don't remember every single argument that was made, but I remember the two main arguments that kept being repeated. And I'm going to try and speak to those and then address a couple of other issues that come out of that. But I want to say this. I'm making this video because I realized this is obviously a bigger issue than I thought it was. I thought this wasn't really an issue in the church anymore, but it clearly is. And yes, I'm going to speak about whether or not Christians should be drinking alcohol and how do we handle alcohol responsibly. But ultimately, that's not what this is all about. There's actually something far more important, far deeper involved in this. And I want to speak about that, which I'll get to in the second part of this video. The first argument was that I saw come up a few times and kept being referenced back to, the word for wine can mean both fermented and unfermented grapes. That's where the distinction comes, so you have to distinguish, is this particular passage speaking about fermented grapes, and is this passage speaking about unfermented grapes? We know that in the biblical times, people drank both wine and unfermented grapes. In the Old Testament, there's a word for that. However, when the Bible uses the word wine, you can be absolutely certain it's referring to the same thing that we mean when we say wine today. There was no confusion at that time about what this word means. And I could not find a single biblical scholar. In fact, one of the most reputable Christian dictionaries said emphatically that when the Bible uses the word wine, it is absolutely certain that they are speaking about fermented grapes, not unfermented. We don't have time to look at every single scripture to see that they really in their context mean fermented wine. The best example is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Go and read it for yourselves. In there, Paul is talking about where the Christians were getting together around the communion table. Some of them were getting no food and were going hungry, and some of them were getting drunk. Now, how is it that believers were getting drunk around the communion table if they were not drinking fermented grape juice? And then very briefly, just the second argument was mainly around using the terminology of our body as being a temple of God. Just a couple of things around that. First of all, when Paul uses that phrase, he's referring to having sex with prostitutes. I think even those who are absolutely set against drinking would agree that having sex with a prostitute and drinking a glass of wine, you cannot say is the same thing. If we take the whole temple language to a logical conclusion, then we need to say, well, first of all, in the temple of the Old Testament, there were vessels made specifically to hold wine. And wine was one of the offerings that were brought. There were drink offerings of wine brought. So if I want to take a logical conclusion to that language, then any good Christian should have a little bit of wine in them as worship to God, because that's what the temple had in it. My personal experience is, I grew up in a family where wine, in particular, other alcoholic beverages as well, but wine in particular was an everyday part of our lives. We drank wine at most big family occasions. I never saw anyone drunk. It was just part of life. So what was modeled to me is wine is something we can enjoy. It's part of God's creation, and we can enjoy it, and we can do so responsibly. I never even thought of, the only time I was exposed to people getting drunk was when I was in high school. And by that time, my own understanding of it had been shaped and formed by what I had seen in my family. Absolutely loving and honoring God and drinking wine at the same time. Okay, quick disclaimer before we move on to part 2. Drinking is not something that we should take lightly. Don't drink if it causes someone else to stumble. Don't drink if you can't control yourself. If you know that drinking controls you, don't do it. Especially if you have a history in your family of people having alcohol addiction, it's probably a chance that you might be susceptible to that as well. This video is also not a license for people to drink and say, oh, he said drinking is okay, so I can drink. You need to come to a conviction according to your own conscience before God and before the church community that you are part of. Okay, now we get to the real reason why I wanted to make this video. I really believe that the root of this issue is crucial to our understanding of the gospel. Jump with me to Mark chapter 7. Jesus has an exchange there with religious leaders of his time. They are complaining to him because his disciples are not doing the ritual hand washings, which was part of the Jewish tradition. Note, Jewish tradition, not what God had instructed them to do. And they're having an exchange with Jesus, and Jesus responds to them with these words from Mark chapter 7 verse 6. He says, "Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." And then he goes on to say to them, "Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the traditions of men." So Jesus is saying a couple of things. First of all, he's saying that they are rather focusing on the traditions of men rather than what God has commanded, and in doing so, their hearts are actually far away from God. They've got an appearance of holiness, but in their hearts are far from God. So in a nutshell, what is Jesus saying? When we make our own outward standards of holiness more important than God's standard of heart change, what happens is that we present to the world an appearance of holiness, and we're very good at that because we're good at keeping our own laws, but our hearts are never changed. And it makes us look good to other people because we're really good at keeping those laws and we're able to maintain this, but actually God is not able to deal with our hearts. The implication of this is massive, because we as leaders then, we cannot receive the healing and the change that God wants to give to us because we're hiding that from Him with our outward appearance of everything's fine. I'm so good at keeping these laws. And at the same time, the people who we lead, we're also not leading them in a place where they can receive healing and heart change, because we're leading them to do exactly as we do, and we set upon them a lot of standards of strict rules that a lot of them can't obey. So some of them run away because they can't keep these laws that we can keep. And the ones who really want to be healed, they realize, well, no one's actually being healed here. And they also go away, and we actually harm the people that God has placed in our care. And there's a real danger here that people in our movements, in our churches, cannot find true salvation because what we're actually teaching them is just a ritual, an outward process of appearing holy to other people without God actually changing our hearts. And then Jesus goes on to say the following things in verse 15 that are so crucial for how we understand the gospel. Verse 15, he says this, "There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man." And he said to them in verse 18, "Are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from the outside cannot defile him? Because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and is eliminated." Thus he declared all foods clean. And he was saying, that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit and sensuality and envy and slander and pride and foolishness. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. Have you ever had a problem with your car or your PC or even with your smartphone where you just can't figure out what's wrong with it, and you know that you changed the settings somewhere in some sub menu and you can't find that, just to click that little thing and fix it again? See, half the problem is not actually solving the issue, but finding the location of the problem. And in these verses, what Jesus is doing is something so important. He's giving us the location of our problem of sin. And he's saying the problem of sin is not something out there. It's not this thing or that thing. The problem of sin is right in our hearts. You may have heard people say movies are evil, or the internet's evil, or TV is evil, or this kind of music is evil, or drinking is evil. People will say these things, and what they're doing is they're actually putting the location of evil outside of themselves. They're saying those things are, I'm not evil, those things are evil. And that has a profound consequence on how we understand the gospel and whether or not the gospel is actually able to change our lives. Jesus did not come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people alive. When I realized that there is so much evil and wickedness, sorry for the rain, but we need it. There's so much evil and wickedness inside my own heart I realized that actually I am really dead spiritually and I need to be made alive. I need someone to do this for me because I am helpless to be a better person. So I want to say to any one of you who's watching, if you're struggling with any sin that is hidden in your life, God is able to heal you no matter what it is. You need to just be real with God about what is going on in your heart. You need to be real with other people, not just anyone, but people who understand these truths. And over time, by His grace and by His truth, God will heal you. There is hope for you no matter what it is that you're facing, no matter what sin you are trapped in. If this video has been meaningful to you, if it's been helpful to you, share with someone that you think might be blessed by it, and I will see you guys next time. Please remember to subscribe down below, and if you like this video, hit the like button, and see you guys next time.